Thursday, January 22nd episode of Freightonomics. Zach Strickland, head of Freight Market Intelligence, here with Thomas Wasson to break down all of the occurrences in the freight and transportation market, as well as sprinkle in a dose of economics. As we proceed through 2026 in the early phases, we are finally getting our first winter weather event, and it's a significant one. We will dive into that here in a few. But we also had the President of the United States, Donald Trump, address the European Union yesterday. There is a little bit of supply chain involvement nowadays with a lot of this activity, so we have to address that a little bit. And then, of course, just talking about the freight market dynamics, supply chains are obviously constantly evolving at this point. This post-COVID reality that we're in, we have not found kind of this kind of stabilization of this settling point for multiple reasons. But I think a lot of it is just we have a lot of moving parts in the geopolitical space, in the economics, and just the world in general.
And I mean, it's one of the things where last time we spoke, we were hoping the Supreme Court would give us some stuff to talk about. Nada. But you know who delivered? The freight gods did. And so now we have our first winter storm. I think it's notable because one thing we didn't have was hurricanes. And so when we're looking at market stress tests, we've got road check week, we've got holidays, normally events where a bunch of truckers don't drive and stay at home for one reason or the other. And so with a hurricane, we normally see the capacity. None of that. Our first winter storm going to be a great stress test because I feel like there's less slack in the system, and it's going to kind of help tee us up on expectations moving forward.
And the market is already sort of stressed. We have not recovered. We just had our anxiety attack around the holidays, and for the shipping community specifically. But and we're still kind of dosing ourselves, trying to figure out, well, we're not really settled down. So on that note, Thomas Wasson, I think a market in two to set the table might be what the people need.
Let's do it. I'm going to count us down. We'll go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, starting things off with tender rejections. The tendies don't lie. They are still up close to 10%. We are slowly coming out of our holiday highs, which were around 13% on this index. And, if you notice that little notch in the yellow line underneath this one, that was a series of winter storms that actually penetrated a little bit further south and disrupted the market. We had some cold air as well that really disrupted things. If you look even further down the line there in that greenish teal color, that was 2 years ago when we had a deep cold weather event that hit the market. We saw rejection rates bounce that time too. We haven't had any of that this year. And so this weekend, I do expect that we'll have a little bit of a notch higher, especially on the heels of this storm, which is going to drop significant amounts of snow and ice across the eastern half of the country. Now, if we move into the next chart here, looking at tender rejection rates for refrigerated in the blue line and in van, you see the hesitancy of van. It's really not trying to fall down just yet. Refrigerated's a little faster, but still very, very high, above 15%. The refrigerated market has really had an outsized reaction to the holiday season. And I think now that we've got some Arctic air plunging south, this will also boost that market. So we go to the next chart, looking at spot rates. For those of you that don't read tendies, even though you should because they're far more objective and clean. You've got spot rates, which are noisy and emotional, and I do love them as well. But refrigerated spot rates on the top here, spiking and still staying very, very high relative to where they were the rest of the year. Van on the bottom, same type of signal. A weird, sluggish response from van that is now accelerating downward, which I think we'll see another little boost. And we'll go to the last chart here. Tender rejections by region. The Midwest is the white line on top. The West is the orange line in depression on the bottom. 4% rejection rate down there, but up to 13% in the Midwest. The Midwest is about to get hit again with another reason to stay elevated.
I was about to say, someone had to punish Indiana for winning the national championship. And so I'm pretty sure somebody did like a rain dance or a snow dance. This was premeditated, folks.
Yeah, I think, too, the fact the Midwest obviously is the coldest pocket of air in the country that has been consistent throughout the winter thus far. December was a fairly cold month for a lot of these areas. I think Chicago's supposed to hit negative 15 this weekend or into next week. So cold air is very, very disruptive to transportation. I think that's an understated thing. You don't necessarily need precipitation in every situation. Yes, it helps, and it's like everything we intuitively understand, but people don't understand. Do they even know what diesel gelling is?
You got to keep the truck warm.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, like cold weather, if you are out on the road and sleeping in your truck, you're thinking, okay, snow and ice. Well, no, you either idle your truck, you've got a bunk heater, you've got something, and if it gets cold enough and it stresses that equipment, remember, kids, 1 out of 4 trucks on the road can't pass an inspection. So I hope they paid attention to their bunk heater while their tires were falling off.
All right, I want to hit pause on the weather for a second, and we'll get back to that because seeing some actual evidence of some physical hits to the freight market. I've already touched on those with the tender rejection rates. Those were not like super heavy snow events like we're about to see through this large corridor this weekend. So, and this market is super fragile. So I want to touch more on that in a bit, but we have to cover the fact that we had President Trump address the European Union yesterday, and a long address. And I want to preface this by stating that, this is not a political discussion. This is not the show for politics or anything like that, but it has become something that we have to consistently address because that's the world we live in now. Like it or not, a lot of these political things, and I would caution everyone, there was a podcast, Thomas Wasson, that I listened to the other day, and it really put it in perspective for me. And this is the way that I approach a lot of these topics, these political topics that a lot of people get emotionally charged about, and that's fine. But it put it into perspective. It's called Triggernomics. I highly recommend it. But they had a guy named Greg Burowitz on, writer for the Times, New York Times, and there's a psychological study. And psychology is a very vague, theoretical realm of science that is I was a psychology minor, and it's admitted that it has not had a long history. So there's a lot of things they don't have a good ethical way of proving out, especially since the human mind is very complicated. But one of the things that he addresses is the fact that this left and right political spectrum that we are all on in some way, whether we acknowledge it or not, is actually a process of psychology. So far left is, one side of the spectrum, far right is the other side of the spectrum. And trying to convince somebody to change their perspective on politics is a worthless endeavor.
Yeah.
And that's not what I'm trying to do. So he said that there are psychological personality traits highly associated with people that lean left and lean right. One of those traits being openness and agreeability tend to be left-leaning. Those that like to have structure and order tend to be right-leaning. I cannot change your personality, Thomas Wasson, and I'm not trying to change your personality, but we do. I think one of the things that he says is that this is a design by nature. We are supposed to have people on both sides of the spectrum. When you look at your political maps and the fact that we have almost a 50% split, that is nature in action. We are supposed to have people that have this tendency for left-leaning things and these people that have a tendency for right-leaning things. It is good for the overall population. What needs to happen, though, is they don't need to wall themselves off from each other. We need each other to kind of come together and have these discussions and move forward. We need to wall some things off. We can't completely be, loosey-goosey with everything that we do, but we also don't need to be so strict and restrictive on things. And I think most people, and the way that he really put this into perspective is, this means that 80% of the population you don't really hear from.
Yep.
The 10% on either end are the ones that are getting a lot of the elevated volume due to the fact that there's a natural algorithm in a lot of our media nowadays. We're part of a media institution as well. And that kind of keeps escalating that volume over time. And so there's a continuous movement to the outer fringes of this. That is not what this show's purpose is. But I think addressing some of these functionalities so that you can feel free to discuss them in the context of productive conversations, such as supply chain management, as this is what this is supposed to be. Like Greenland.
Yep.
There was a lot of nervousness around what we were going to do in terms of physically invading Greenland. Most people would say that's probably not a great idea because that is an aggressive action on an allied state of being with the Netherlands. And what this would have done was just kind of exacerbate this theme of trade tensions that really has locked up the domestic economy from having a growth cycle. And looking at freight data, that is.
Yeah.
We look at freight data purely. The economic data is great color, but it's a little less precise for us. So from the goods economy perspective, which is largely what the transportation markets deal with, the trade with China, the trade tensions there, they influence and have a downward effect on a lot of those goods that are coming in from China. We don't have a ton of freight coming in from the Netherlands, but if the European Union were to kind of gel together and we would put tariffs on the European Union, that would cause another downturn potentially on goods coming into the United States. And it's not just about finished physical goods. Dr. Rogers comes on the show and discusses this a lot. But it's components and parts. And we have trade deals in place that a lot of our infrastructure depends on. So when we're talking about some of these things, think about it in the context of what does this mean for supply chains? A lot of this tariff negotiation process, whether you agree it's going to work in the long run or not, doesn't matter. In the near term, there is a stalling effect as companies and businesses hit reset or play defense, which is a lot of the reason that we see these inventory levels kind of slow down. Consumers haven't slowed down necessarily. A lot of the data around consumption has been good, but the fact that we had this pull forward of freight and now that's kind of fizzling out as yet again, like why we were waiting on the tariff ruling from the Supreme Court.
Yep.
We need clarity to start making plans and decisions for the future. And until we get some clarity, and the reason this is important is this is yet another kind of cloud of uncertainty around forward-looking plans, whether you deal with the Netherlands or Germany or whoever. This makes a little bit of a cloud of uncertainty around supply chains with an international relationship.
And I think one of the big things is you had a great point about the psychology of it all. Right now, everyone's getting caught up in depending upon what jersey you're wearing. But I think one of the most important takeaways right now is that supply chains are now tools of geopolitical and foreign policy. So when we're talking about this from a larger thing, why Greenland? Well, when we're thinking of supply chains, I need to make tanks, I need to make vehicles, and I need to make sure that my own supply chain is prepared if I need to go to war. Well, the problem is that, China has done a great job at cornering supply chains and using that as a tool as part of their geopolitical toolkit. And so if you're going to say that I don't like you and I'm China, I'm just going to cut off the rare earths. Well, you think, well, that's not a big deal. Well, they got like 90% of it. And so when we're looking at the commentary from Trump and everything, one thing I want to remind you is there's two big key things about Greenland that makes more sense if we think about supply chains and geopolitics. One, if you launch a missile at the United States from Russia or China, it's going to go over Greenland, and the little point where it's most kind of weak before it goes really, really fast and you can't shoot it is right over Greenland. So that explains one of the parts. The second one is trade lanes. As we have a warming climate, there is more access. The ice has melted more. Shipping lanes are going to become crucial, as well as the permafrost and the thawing gives us access to minerals. So one of the other challenges we see right now is the European Union has been basically trying to have their cake and eat it too. They have extensive trade relations with the United States, but they're also allowing Chinese multinationals to come in and hollow it out because the Germans have had an export economy and they're basically trying to use Russian energy exported over to China and say everything's cool. That is coming to an end. And so when we're wondering why suddenly FreightWaves is having to talk about the impacts of Greenland, it's because there is a delicate dance where we're seeing a nearshoring trend where the United States have finally come to realize that we're going into a multipolar world and that the current order, just like Canadians PM Carney had said, the current order is no longer working when other folks are taking advantage of it. So it is part of a larger context that you're going to miss the delicious nougaty details because you're going to hear comments and rhetoric by Trump. But when you're zooming out, this is part of a decades-long policy problem under multiple administrations where Europe has been basically the equivalent of a free rider, and now they're really, really angry because they're going to have to pick a side. India's done a better job. By the way, India has done an extremely better job. They get to buy Russian military equipment, get to have some U.S. military equipment. They can have some Chinese investment while still having high tariffs on Chinese tech and stuff to protect it. It's very fascinating to watch. And so I think that as we continue to see these developments, realize that our supply chains are now elements of national security. And when we're looking at these decisions, it makes a lot more sense when we're trying to secure where we get our goods.
Yeah, try to remove the politics from the situation. Look at what's actually happening. I know that's difficult and challenging, but also another show mainly, but we do now have to address it a little bit more than we used to because it's influencing businesses all over the world and obviously the transportation markets. Let's get back into the transportation market domestically and talk about this weather. So the big story this week clearly is the winter storm, Fern, as the Weather Channel calls it. And it's basically going to hit a large portion of the Midwest, largely with cold weather in the northern tier. But there's a stretch of precipitation from about Oklahoma all the way over into the New England corridor, hitting Philadelphia with as much as 20 inches of snow, a little bit of ice, and there's a ton of ice on the southern kind of strip of this storm, it stretches from about Dallas all the way into Virginia, is where the ice is primarily set to hit. As much as an inch of ice scheduled to hit Nashville, Tennessee. So ice, you really can't do a lot with it. One of the problems with ice, obviously the direct hit to roads and infrastructure there. There's not a lot of salt trucks in the southern United States. They're not equipped. But even when you're talking about salting the roads for ice, the problem is that it works too well. The rain falls, it does not freeze on contact. It then gets washed off, and then whatever's left, the ice will just form on top of that because you wash the salt away. The salt is very ineffective against ice storms. When you have this much moisture, that is. When it's just a little bit of moisture, it's fine. But this is going to be a lot of moisture. There's a lot of deep Pacific moisture associated with this. If we show the map again, this is the amount of snowfall that is scheduled to hit. So pinks and whites, whenever you see pinks and whites on a weather map, that's a severe situation. So there's a ton of snow. I talked about almost 2 feet of snow in Philadelphia. The I-95 corridor is going to get blasted. And then south of this, kind of the southern fringe of where you see the purples and whites, that's not as much snow, but there's a large chunk of that's going to be ice. And there's just not a lot you can do there. You cannot drive in it. You have to wait for them to clear it. It's not plowable. And certainly there's not a lot of plows in the region of the country where this exists anyway. So we do expect that this is going to have a significant influence on transportation, even if you are not in the direct landing zone of a lot of this precipitation. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but this is a pretty strong system.
And the good news is it's hitting over a weekend. That one of the big deals is that when you're a driver, take a 34-hour reset, shut down. But there's going to be a fun instance of the Spider-Man meme where both the driver's running late, but the shipper can't open because they're both iced in. And so coming into Monday, while there's a pro that it's happening over the weekend compared to a week, the con is going to be, okay, well, now you're moving again. Is the facility going to be open? Communication is going to be key because we're going to have delays on both sides. It doesn't matter if the trucker can't get there if the dock workers can't also get there.
Yeah. I want to show one more map, the temperature map that I believe is in the second column there. There we go. So this is the temps on Monday. And I just want to call this out that like that purple area, that is your coldest weather. And there is zeros and negative temps going all the way into Mississippi. So again, this is not just a winter weather precipitation event, but whatever ice and snow is in that area where you see those dark purples, it's warmer in Minneapolis by Tuesday than it is in Nashville, Tennessee, mind you. That's going to stay on the ground. So we were talking about multiple days, deep cold weather, and a lot of stuff on the road. So with that, we had some earnings, Thomas Wasson.
We got data. Let's do it.
Let's do it. So Knight-Swift, largest for-hire carrier in the United States, released their earnings. And I'm an earnings nerd. And of course, I want to read the tea leaves on what they said. So my big takeaways, Thomas Wasson, we saw revenue deterioration. We saw them reduce their tractor count. Their miles were up. Their deadhead was down, or their revenue per mile was up. So basically, they got more productive. I know that they got an earnings miss. And for anybody that's watched me do this on this show, you know I don't care about what some analysts thought their earnings were going to be. That's not the point of this. I'm not trading Knight-Swift stock. That's where that matters. What I do read here, though, is operational efficiency gains despite the fact that their OR increased. So they were more productive. They played a little bit of defense, but there is a problem in the transportation sector. If you play defense too hard for too long, you are now less flexible to respond to market conditions going to the other side of the pendulum.
Yep.
And what I see here is a very wound tight operational efficiency. They have ingested US Express, which was operating at a plus 100 OR for a long time. Looks like they are still handling that just fine. A 92.9% OR in this environment is wonderful, in my personal opinion. That means they're making roughly 7 cents on every dollar that they spend operationally. Now, they did post a net loss, but that was due to other factors, financing and things like that. So Todd Maiden, of course, covers that in this article. So I'm not super concerned about this from an operational standpoint for Knight-Swift. I think they're also kind of signaling they're ready for the turn.
Let me look at that. Keep that chart up there for a minute. I'm going to put on my fleet operations hat here because the important thing is average tractor count down nearly 5%. Miles per tractor, though, up 1.2. The good news is also loaded miles are down 3.3, but average length of hauls also down. Revenue per tractor up 2.3. One of the big things, I'm throwing numbers at you, in truckload space, revenue per tractor per week, rev miles per tractor per week are kind of your bread and butter and working tractor count. This is a very, very typical circle the wagons, hold it. Don't, if you have to unseat some units and let a few hundred go, definitely do it. But I'm going to give them credit. If you're in the middle of a crap market and you're pulling like 92.2 OR, like 10% is good. Even this is a low margin business. I was expecting, if bad would be 97, 98, 99. So shout out to the folks at Knight-Swift. This is showing discipline. I'm going to put on my little talking heads thing. Very disciplined and pragmatic, but like Zach said, whenever the turn comes, you've already locked in these deals. You're making defensive plays. It's going to be really hard to change your mix to take advantage of spot market when you're thinking, I need to make sure contract is good, contract is stable. At least I've got something. That's going to make them be a quarter or two late, but that's typical of a large carrier. So, kudos to those guys. It's a tough market, and everyone else is running like 95 to 100 OR.
Yeah, and they just need some help on pricing because the market has not allowed them to increase their pricing sufficiently, but they're doing better than most. The LTL segment, revenue was up, shipments were up, OR was down, it was up. It increased slightly. This in the LTL market is just fine. It looks like they won some business on pricing, but they had to buy it at a cost. So they lost some operating margin there. Still fine business, and it will serve them well. LTL is largely a market share game. They don't actually see a strong influence or injection of volume in this space. That's more reflected than the truckload side, but there's not as much wobble in the demand side component of LTL. They gained some share. They bought that with some operating costs. This looks okay. I can't read much into this one in terms of LTL market movement. It looks like a fairly stable-ish environment from reading just this one, and I would need more to make that call.
Got you covered. They're combining the network. They're still digesting it. A 2 to 3 year process. Right now, 95 is high on LTL standards. Those guys love to be between 80 and 90 OR. 85 is kind of your sweet spot. And so, especially in this LTL space, if I'm Knight-Swift in leadership, one of the things you got to think about is how do we make it work better? I would assume it's going to continue to get better through the tech as well as the routing optimizations. But that's one of the key things is, Knight-Swift went and bought it. You can buy an LTL, but you got to work hard to keep it. And so keep an eye on that development. I'm sure that number is going to be something that management's going to say we need to get that down 500 more basis points.
Yeah, I think they'll be fine there, especially if the truckload market has a turn this year. Last section here, the logistics section, the brokerage, the 3PLs. I don't pull a lot out of an asset-based 3PL division, but I'm seeing margin compression in the last quarter of the year compared to last year. I would expect this. This is exactly what I would expect when you're talking about spiking spot rates. It's very, very challenging to manage that transportation when you've got a very unstable rate side environment. They seem to have managed it okay. Their OR did increase, but this is sort of the front edge of a market turn for a brokerage. This is what it looks like. You see these margins compress rapidly, which they did. What is a little bit weird is that their revenue did not increase simultaneously in a market where they should have been doing some ad hoc. But again, that's not the pure model of an asset-based 3PL.
The only challenge right now is intermodal. I mean, 100 to 101, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement on that. Intermodal usually can do a little bit better due to the complexities if you do it right. But I mean, at the end of the day, given the conditions, given all the headwinds, heck, take what you can get.
Yeah, last but not least, my chart of the week, and this fits perfectly with the narrative of Knight-Swift's brokerage. They are having margin compression. This is basically talking about the spot to contract gap collapsing over the holidays. If we pull up the chart and show them that green line is the spot rate, the white line is the contract rate. The fact that you can have a 20% gap leading into November 20th and it's gone by December 22nd is insane. The fact that we have such a fragile spot market environment that we really jumped over contract rates briefly, because a lot of that increase in the VC RPM contract rate you see there is actually route guide deterioration. This market is extremely fragile and poised to flip this.
We talked about green shoots. We'll see if Fern delivers, folks.
Yeah, I would definitely be watching out for the winter weather this week. The spot market's already telling us that it's clear to evaporate. And I think these winter weather situations only exacerbate that. Now, is it a sustained situation?
We'll find out next week.
I don't know.